Thank you. We're singing about joy today, hopeful joy. Beneath the forest floor lies a tangle of roots and fungi called mycorrhiza. It's also known as the Wood Wide Web. The popular podcast Radio Lab has a great episode on that, on mycorrhiza, and in the synopsis, they describe this unbelievable organism like this. They say it's a strange creature that burrows beneath forests, building an underground network where deals are made and lives are saved and lost in a complex web of relationships, rivalries, and business relations. It's a network that scientists are only just beginning to untangle and map. And it's not only turning our understanding of forests upside down, it's leading some researchers to rethink what it means to be intelligent. I guess we have to be at least as intelligent as the roots of a tree. This extraordinary network of tiny tubes allows for the species to share information and resources. And it truly sustains and nurtures the life of the forest. That seems like a fitting image for today. It's a way to help us understand the kind of joy at the heart of our Advent series. Joy that is steadfast and faithful, joy that courses through the cosmos, nurturing and sustaining life even when we don't pay any attention to it. On the surface of things, our world looks pretty bleak right now, and so we need to find out how we can look beneath the surface, right? How we can help connect with one another and abide in deep joy. Not just happiness, as Tia was pointing out, but a deep joy. In her commentary on Isaiah, Reverend Barbara Lundblad invites us to see things the way that Isaiah did. Isaiah saw this temple high on a mountain where disputes would be settled peacefully, and swords turned into plowshares, and spears into pruning hooks. The weapons of war would become tools of cultivation. So through these images, Isaiah offers the people of Jerusalem a new perspective, a new way to look at things. It offers them hope during times of war and despair. While people long for joy and hope, sometimes it's hard to find, isn't it? Where does joy live, and how does joy cultivate hope? You know, when I was young, I thought that following God and being a Christian would lead to a life that was kind of easy, you know, filled with happiness and good things, and God answering all my prayers and doing what I wanted, that kind of thing. I'm not sure where I got that idea. Maybe because at first it seemed kind of easy. I was just really happy about Jesus, and I felt good about the church. And it seemed like God heard my prayers and had my back, and seemed to answer my prayers the way I wanted most of the time. It's so appealing, this thought of being a true believer and so being spared suffering and being gifted with this very positive experience. The problem is, of course, that it's completely contrary to what the Bible teaches. If Jesus was perfected through suffering, I mean, who are we to think that we won't be perfected in the same way? But don't get me wrong, Jesus did come, the Bible tells us, that we might have life and have it abundantly, have it to the full. And it's the joy of the Lord that is our strength. It's just that this promised joy and life come to us in the midst of both the easy and the hard, the triumphs and the travails. So the key then is to intentionally cultivate that joy in our hearts, to choose it, no matter what season we're living through, the easy or the hard. And life is hard a lot of the time. We're all painfully aware of that. This world we live in is not Eden. We have not reached heaven yet. But in the middle of this difficult journey, God has taken great measures to preserve our freedom of choice. We have the freedom to choose to grow in joy or to run from it. Said another way, life will be inevitably hard at times, and as maturing believers, maturing Christians with our eyes set on Jesus, we will constantly be presented with opportunities to make choices that will either lead to a deeper joy or not. So here's what I mean. It's hard to stand up against a group when they're going in the wrong direction, whether it's spiritually or any other way. But it's also hard on our consciousness if we don't. It's hard to be kind to mean and nasty neighbors, but it's hard as well to be convicted later of being unloving. It's hard not to spend money on things we desire. It's hard to save money, but it's also hard to be in debt. It's hard to have a loving but tough confrontational conversation with a friend. But it's also hard to not have one and then have that friendship decrease distance from one another, increase distance from one another. It's hard to fight for a marriage. It's hard to lose a marriage. It's hard to break an addiction, and it's hard to be captive to one. It's hard to live under the cloak of depression, and it's also hard to make that step toward healing. It's hard to face the story of your life, but it's hard to live in denial. It's hard to reject the pressure of other people's demands. It's hard as well to live under them. It's hard to set aside time every single day to press into the heart of God. Sometimes it's even hard to pray, to find the words, to find the emotion. But it's harder to live your day with strength and hope and integrity if you don't. It's hard to pursue living water, but it's hard to live in a dry and thirsty land without it. It's hard to fight for and guard your heart. It's hard to lose it. It hurts when it breaks. We get to choose our hard, right? And the decision we make will either lead to cultivating our hearts with a hope-filled joy or deadening them with weariness and despair. Every morning when I wake up, I can guess that there are going to be some hard things during the day. But the hard I choose is to follow Christ wherever he leads. And that hard leads me to life and joy, always, even in the midst of suffering. So I urge you to choose life and choose gratitude and choose to obey and choose the good and choose the joy and choose Jesus. You know, another way we connect to deep joy is through our rituals. The scripture from the book of Romans reminds us to put on Christ. It's a call to remember our baptism, our initiation into this wonderful community called the church, where we're called to be the hands and feet of Christ to a broken world. Advent is this time of anticipation, right? A time for hope, for good and gracious things to come. But it isn't a time of passive waiting. It's a time between the darkness of night and the light of day that each of us is called to wake up and get dressed. In our baptism, we're ordained to the work of the gospel, and it seems this is something like a third shift, right? That the shift between day and night, that swing shift is what I was thinking. Who's going to be in the shop grinding away the sharp edges, creating plows and pruning hooks while the rest of the world sleeps? We can wait around for the right tools for the job, or we can create them. We can continue to see just what is on the surface, or we can dig deep and see something that we could not have ever imagined. All of this was bringing to mind for me a children's book that I wanted to read to you, but when I got to Barnes & Noble, it was out of print. So I was looking through the shelves to find one, and I found one I like even better, so I'm going to read you a story today. The illustrations will be on the screen. It's called Imagine That. It's an Olive and Hoot book. Olive First page. Olive had a great big imagination, which was only just a smidge smaller than her huge heart. Her best friend, Hoot, had a heart that was equally big. His imagination, however, well, one rainy day, Hoot discovered something unexpected. Olive tugged on Hoot's wing. "Hey, let's go on a pretend adventure," she said. "Rainy days are perfect for that." Hoot agreed, but in the very moment he tried to imagine something magnificent, he imagined nothing at all. "I lost it," said Hoot. "Lost what?" asked Olive. "My imagination," he replied, "and I can't remember where I had it last." Then he got a more upsetting idea. Or maybe my imaginator is broken. "I don't think it works like that," said Olive, "but if it's broken, we should try to fix it." "How?" said Hoot. Olive was puzzled. "Actually, I don't know. You just pretend like something is, even though you know it really isn't." Just then, the rain began to beat harder against the window. "I know," she said. "What if the water gets higher than just a little and the puddles grow really big?" Suddenly, Olive felt the house lurch. "Hoot," cried Olive, "do you feel that? We're floating away." But Hoot felt nothing. "It's only a puddle," he said, looking out the window. Olive sighed. A puddle isn't a very good adventure. Then she got another idea. "It looks like an antenna," said Hoot. "Because it is," said Olive. "Your head must be all scrambly. That's why your imagination isn't working." "How clever," said Hoot. "A head unscrambler." Olive led Hoot into a room full of shadows. She gasped. "Do you see that?" she said. "In the corner?" "See what?" asked Hoot. "The GIANT, Olive whispered. One more. But Hoot saw nothing. "Maybe I blinked," he said. "Or maybe it's worse than I thought," replied Olive. So Olive tried earmuffs. "For your leaky ears," she said. "How else could your imagination be escaping?" "I guess that's why they tickle sometimes," said Hoot, following Olive to the cellar. They stepped into the dark, and something fluttered. Olive froze. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Fairies." But Hoot heard nothing. "These ear mufflers might keep my insides from coming outside," he said, "but I can't hear anything with them on." So Olive tried something sleepy, then something upside down, and then perhaps 1 or 10 other somethings, but nothing worked. "Maybe I can't be fixed," said Hoot. "Or maybe you're not really trying," said Olive. It was quiet for a long while. Finally, in a small voice, Hoot spoke. "Why is it, when my imagination is the thing that's broken, it's my heart that hurts the most?" "That's it," shouted Olive. She had forgotten the most important part. "You have to imagine with this," she said, placing her hand over Hoot's heart. "Should I try again?" asked Hoot. "You should always try again," said Olive. So Hoot closed his eyes. "I see something," said Hoot, "but it's so small." "That's how everything starts," replied Olive. "If you want it to grow, you have to love it." So Hoot imagined again with his whole huge heart. "You did it!" shouted Olive. "Of course I did," said Hoot. But that was only the beginning. When the clouds broke and the world sparkled in the sun, Hoot and Olive's imaginations spilled onto everything. They sailed to far-off places and saw magnificent things. They built castles and tamed dragons. They were heroes and kings. That day they played till their laughs finally turned into tired giggles. "Thank you," said Hoot. "For what?" asked Olive. "For showing me the most important part." Olive smiled. "What should we imagine tomorrow?" asked Hoot. "We could be pirates," said Olive, "searching for treasure." "That's an extra good idea," said Hoot. "Do you think we could also imagine being friends forever?" And they did. They imagined it all and so much more. Both of them together. Nice. So how do we best prepare to make room for the Christ child? How do we help usher in new light, new insight, new perspectives, new imagination? I think today we'll start by taking communion together and remembering what has been so that we can imagine what could be.